Douglas Yates is a professor at the American University here in Paris, joins me now. And Douglas, I know that you were predicting a victory for Mr. Sarkozy just a few months ago. So, I mean, tell us what went wrong and your reaction to this outcome.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. I wanted to stick with my prediction, and I think I was the very last one to do so that if I were wrong, I could understand why. And I believe there's a few things that we can learn for the next election. One is that the National Front is interested in undermining the center-right and becoming the opposition party in France. So although many National Front voters did come out and vote for Sarkozy, who got nearly half of the electorate, enough of them are going to be ready to vote strategically against the center-right. That is, they've learned from 2007. The second was the center, François Bayrou, who traditionally allied with the right, against the left. François Bayrou moved to the left. A lot of his voters did.
That was a big blow for Nicolas Sarkozy.
Yeah, this is a polarized society, 51-49, and those 2 or 3 percentages have pushed the majority to the left.
So does this polarized society then translate into a potential transformation in the French political landscape? Is this something that we're going to see as we look ahead to the parliamentary election in June? Certainly a lot of strategists are saying that there is a downside risk in the markets as we head to those elections. Are we going to see the far right snatching ever more voters, constituencies away from the centre-right, from the UMP?
Yeah, the electoral system here works in 2 rounds. And here in the second round with the presidential election, we had just 2 candidates, giving one of them a majority. But in the legislative elections, it's different, and you can have 3 candidates get to the second round. If 2 of them are from the right, a National Front and a UMP, they've got a problem. If one doesn't stand down for the other, they both lose. So the socialists are trying to position themselves to take away those constituencies that otherwise have a majority on the right. This forces the UMP to consider alliances with the National Front, something that's anathema.
All right. Now, Douglas, I know that you have compared François Hollande to Tony Blair's New Labour. Does that suggest that Hollande isn't as radical as many had feared?
Yeah, in the United States, just the word socialist sounds like the extreme left. But they had a primary here, and in the primary, there were leftist socialists who ran and lost. The socialists, in the end, chose a man who was centrist, who was able to take François Bayrou voters. François Hollande also isn't a personality. He's someone who spent his whole career working within the Socialist Party. He's a party man. So what we'd expect is him to make decisions by committee. He's famous for a style called synthesis, where he gets everyone around the table
Decision by consensus as
and
opposed
seeks
to
the compromise.
perhaps the one-man robust approach that we saw from Mr. Sarkozy.
That was so famous from Sarkozy.
Okay, all right. So, Douglas, just touching on President Obama's meeting just taking place after Mr. Hollande will be meeting in Berlin with German Chancellor Angela Merkel. How do you expect much of a change in the relationship between France and the US?
Yeah, I think that Sarkozy was a very dynamic personality, and but François Hollande is in the same ideological camp. That is, he's in the center-left. And although Obama is in an election year, and that means he has to consider Americans who are hostile and suspicious of Europeans, in the long run, these are 2 people who can get along, so long as Hollande's willing to support Obama's foreign policy.
But it doesn't look as if Hollande has already indicated he's going to accelerate the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan by a year. But do you think that really is just cosmetic? It's not going to be so much of a problem for Obama when it all comes out?
Well, it's funny, but Obama actually was elected originally on a platform where it was implied that he would draw the United States out of those wars. And he found himself involved in wars that he didn't create and identified with them. Perhaps a little pressure to get out on time, if not early, wouldn't be so bad.
And just looking at comparing the styles of these 2 men, I mean, President Nicolas Sarkozy very much brought that fiery, abrasive, robust style to his way of doing foreign policy as well. And we saw that when it came to, when we saw international intervention in Libya. As you say, he's very much made efforts to bring France closer to the US. So how would Mr. Hollande's personal style differ in contrast to what we've seen from Sarkozy?
Well, in the United States, he's a total unknown. And for the moment, all that people will hear is that a socialist has been elected. Slowly, they'll come to know his personality. They'll see him as pragmatic and centrist. And if he makes the right gestures, probably things will go well. They just simply won't think much of France anymore. But in Europe, it's a bit more complicated. Hollande and France are being followed. Under Sarkozy, France was playing a central role in European politics. It's unlikely Hollande will do that. By nature, he's a committee man. And so what I expect to see is Germany return to the center of Europe.
Yeah, but I mean, what about the opportunity that Hollande has actually got to come out and become the standard bearer for the austerity nations? Because, I mean, even in his speech last night in Tour last night, he was saying, you know, I have a certain responsibility for ending austerity in Europe. And you've got a lot of people, I mean, in a way, he's been the guy who's sort of like kick-started this whole austerity versus growth debate.
Well, here's what could happen. I think he is a Keynesian, and he does need some short-term growth, at least to win the legislative elections. So I would expect him to do some spending, a little injection into the economy. But as we all know, looking at the big picture, you can't do that for very long without getting your bond ratings knocked down. And so there could be a jubilant period, an experiment to keep his campaign promises, and then the bill will come due. And the reality is quite constrained. France is no longer in control of its destiny.
It sounds like you're saying no matter what Mr. Hollande wants to do, despite all the anti-austerity rhetoric that we've been hearing from him, ultimately it's the bond investors, it's the markets that will have their way.
Yeah, France has an enormous debt, and it has to service that debt. And it has to service that debt by borrowing more money. And so it finds itself like a third world country, constrained by conditions imposed from the outside. Hollande wants the triumph of the will, but in the end, he'll learn the hard lesson that everyone else learned in Europe.